They didn't notice when Emily Carter entered the lecture hall, a blonde woman in a plain gray cardigan, quietly slipping into the back row. To them, she was invisible. Maybe a janitor? Maybe someone who had wandered into the world of high academia by mistake. Until Professor Harrington, head of the mathematics department, proud and powerful, smiled slyly and pointed straight at her. You, come up here. Try solving this equation. The hall erupted with laughter. A. Janitor. At the front of the room, solving a problem reserved for mathematical prodigies. But in that moment, no one could have imagined. They were about to witness a quiet rebellion, a historic reversal, an unrecognized genius stepping out of the shadows. What do you think happens next? Drop your guess below. And don't look away. This story is only just beginning. Emily Carter walked into the lecture hall like a shadow. A 37-year-old woman with neatly pinned blonde hair, wearing a worn gray cardigan over a white blouse. She chose a discreet seat in the back row, quietly opening a notebook, ready to take notes. No one paid her any attention. It was an afternoon at Texas State University, a special symposium titled The Riemann Hypothesis and Applications in Quantum Computing. The room gathered some of the brightest mathematical minds. On stage stood Professor Richard Harrington, famous for his silver beard and impeccably tailored navy suit adjusting the microphone, his sharp gaze scanning the audience. His eyes paused, briefly, when they found Emily. A slight furrow of the brow, a flicker of disdain that quickly vanished. He knew her. 3 years ago, Emily had applied for a janitorial position here. He'd been the one to sign off on her paperwork. A woman in her 30s, divorced, raising a child alone, incomplete education. Emily had never belonged in the academic ecosystem he proudly curated. And today, here she sat, among grad students, Ph.D. candidates, guest professors from across the country, an outsider. "Welcome to today's symposium," Harrington announced, his voice grand and commanding. "We'll be exploring one of the greatest mysteries in modern mathematics and its potential applications for the future of technology." The hall fell silent. Emily lowered her gaze, began taking notes. One by one, doctoral candidates presented. They filled the whiteboards with dense symbols, spoke in complex jargon. Emily listened intently, copying down every word, every number. Her eyes lit up each time someone mentioned zeta function, non-trivial zeros, or quantum encryption. She understood. She'd loved these numbers since she was a little girl. But here she was, Emily Carter, the janitor. In the front row, a male student whispered to his friend, "Hey, isn't that the cleaning lady from last night? What's she doing taking notes?" They snickered. Emily heard. She clenched her notebook tighter but kept her face calm. They didn't know she'd spent years teaching herself advanced mathematics at night, after work, that she'd lost countless hours of sleep, alone with unsolved equations. She'd once dreamed of becoming a mathematician, but life had been harsh. Her husband left when their daughter was 2. Struggling as a single mom, money tight, Emily had to give up her dream, settling for steady work even if it meant cleaning the very classrooms where others spoke the words she longed to study. She hadn't come to prove anything. She came because she wanted to learn. But Harrington's disdainful glance, the snickering up front, reminded Emily This place wasn't meant for her. Now, I'll demonstrate a new approach to this problem, Harrington said, turning to write a long equation across the board. Emily's eyes followed the symbols. Then she saw it. A mistake. A logical gap in step 4. She hesitated. Should she raise her hand? The air felt heavy. Any questions, Harrington asked, half daring, half dismissive. He was used to fearful nods, to silence. No one ever challenged him. Emily raised her hand. A stunned hush swept the room. Harrington raised an eyebrow. Yes, you are. Emily Carter, she said softly, but clearly. I just wanted to ask, in step 4, doesn't that transformation conflict with the boundary condition? The hall erupted. Harrington stood still for a second, then let out a sly grin. You work in which department again? Janitorial, wasn't it? The audience laughed louder. Perhaps. Harrington leaned toward the mic, voice dripping with mockery. You'd like to come up, solve it for us. Emily felt her heart pounding. But his gaze, their laughter, it awakened something familiar. Being underestimated. This time, she wouldn't back down. Emily stood and walked toward the podium. Emily Carter walked steadily to the chalkboard, each step heavy with the weight of every whisper, every snicker trailing behind her. But she didn't look back. Her eyes stayed fixed on the maze of symbols sprawling across the board. Professor Harrington handed her a piece of chalk. Go ahead, Miss Carter, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. We're all very eager to see how you clean up this equation. The lecture hall burst into laughter. Emily took the chalk, her hand trembling slightly, but her gaze clear. She drew in a deep breath, whispering to herself, Don't let them see you afraid. Do you even know what you're standing in front of? Harrington folded his arms, squinting down at her. This is a high-level theoretical equation tied to quantum encryption. My best grad students wouldn't dare touch it. A student in the front row snickered to his friend. She thinks she's Einstein or something. Emily heard it all. But this time, she didn't bow her head. She looked at the board, to the audience. It was a chaos of numbers and symbols, an unsolvable jungle. But in Emily's mind, the shapes began to arrange themselves. All those nights with her battered laptop, poring over open-access journals, scribbling equations into her worn-out notebook, they flooded back. You've solved harder than this, alone. You don't need their permission. But tonight, you'll let them see. Emily started to write. Instantly, the room fell quiet. The laughter died. She moved step by step. First, a key substitution, then variable reduction, then boundary condition identification. Each stroke was neat, deliberate, precise. Professor Harrington's smirk faded into a furrowed brow. He stepped closer, peering at her work. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a visiting professor from MIT sitting in the front row, unconsciously straightened in her seat, her curiosity morphing into surprise. Emily continued. The chalk wore down as she filled the board with an elegant chain of steps, each building logically on the last. Each line drawn with a steady hand that had practiced in the shadows for years. Behind her, no one laughed anymore. Only silence. She placed the chalk down beside the board, then turned to face the entire lecture hall. A beat of absolute stillness. Professor Harrington stared at the board, his face flushing red, then paling. He lifted a hand, tracing her solution, his finger following each transformation. "This," he muttered. "You used a supplemental transformation in step 3. Emily nodded calmly. "Without it, the equation contradicts the original boundary condition." A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall. A student whispered, "She's right. I tried that once, but I wasn't confident enough to follow it through." Harrington turned, arms crossed, struggling to keep his composure. "Fine, you've solved a piece, but this is just the foundational problem." He turned back to the board, scribbling a denser, more abstract equation. "This is the real challenge, the breakthrough I've been researching. Care to try this one?" "Miss Carter." The air tensed, holding its breath. Emily looked at the board. This time, the equation was unfamiliar, laced with obscure symbols. For a split second, uncertainty flickered in her eyes. Professor Harrington smirked half-mockery, half-challenge. "What's the matter? Or would you prefer to return to your seat?" A student chuckled softly. Emily stared at the board. Then at the chalk in her hand, she thought of Lily, waiting for her at home, of sleepless nights, of every moment she'd cleaned this very classroom, dreaming of one day writing on the board, not beneath it. "No." She gripped the chalk tighter. "No, Professor," she said, her voice steady, resolute. "I'll try." Emily Carter stood there, her back straight, facing the sea of applause rising around her like a tide. The clapping wasn't polite anymore. It wasn't the slow, obligatory kind reserved for guest speakers or familiar faces. It was thunderous, relentless, coming from every corner of the lecture hall. She glanced around, momentarily overwhelmed by the hundreds of faces staring at her, not with ridicule, not with dismissal, but with awe. Professor Harrington still stood frozen, his hand covering his mouth. His eyes flicked from the chalkboard to Emily, then back again, as if unable to reconcile what he saw with the woman he'd once handed a janitorial application. "Actody." Elizabeth Chen from MIT was already on her feet, clapping with a radiant smile. "Bravo," she murmured under her breath. "Bravo." Gregory, a PhD student sitting near the front, leaned forward, whispering in disbelief to his classmate. She cracked it. She actually cracked it." Emily looked at them, her breath still catching in her throat, her heart hammering wildly inside her chest. It wasn't finished, yet. But the path was there. Professor Harrington lowered his hand at last, slowly stepping toward the board. He stared at the final substitution Emily had written, the bold, risky transformation no one had dared try. His lips pressed into a tight line, then parted as he whispered, "Oh, you opened the equation?" He turned to face her, his voice hoarse. "Anyway, Carter, how did you—" Emily swallowed, her voice steady but soft. "I've been solving it in my head. Every night I cleaned this room, a hush fell again. I wasn't allowed to sit in these lectures," she continued, glancing at the familiar rows of seats. "So I listened through the door. And after you all left, I'd copy what was left on the board, and I tried. Again and again." No one spoke. Professor Harrington's gaze softened, the arrogance draining from his features, replaced by something else, something closer to humility. Behind him, Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Emily Carter," she said clearly, addressing the entire hall, "we need to talk." She turned to Harrington. "If you don't mind, I'd like to discuss an academic sponsorship for Mrs. Carter. The hall erupted again, not in laughter, but in cheers. Gregory stood, clapping louder. "You've inspired all of us," he called out. Emily's eyes shimmered as she gave a small, grateful nod. And for the first time, standing at the front of the room she'd once swept every night, Emily Carter realized. She wasn't an outsider anymore. She'd earned this place, not because someone granted her permission, but because she dared to stand up and show them all. A smile crept onto her face as she whispered, mostly to herself, "For you, Lily. I told you, nobody gets to decide what we deserve." And as the applause continued, as hands reached out to shake hers, Emily Carter felt something she hadn't in years. Belonging. Victory. A beginning. The applause thundered again, louder this time, rolling across the lecture hall like waves crashing against cliffs. Emily Carter stood beneath the glow of the overhead lights, her hand still dusted with chalk, her chest rising and falling with a quiet, measured breath. Around her, the whispers had shifted, not mocking anymore, but marveling, awed. Abu, humbled. Doctor, Elizabeth Chen approached the chalkboard, her eyes scanning every line Emily had written, tracing each symbol as if deciphering a treasure map. "This isn't just a solution," she murmured, half to herself. "This is a new lens. A paradigm shift." Professor Harrington stood frozen beside her, pale, beneath the fluorescent glow. He reached out, fingertips grazing one of Emily's notations in the corner of the board, the subtle substitution that had unlocked the entire equation. He spoke under his breath, voice trembling. "Impossible. How did you... This transformation, it's unpublished. I shared it only within an internal research circle." Emily met his gaze, calm and clear. She shrugged lightly. "I didn't know it had a name. I just saw it." A ripple of astonished gasps swept through the room. In the back, a lone student began clapping again, slow, steady until the applause swelled once more, rising in unison, not merely for the math, but for the woman who had dared to step forward. "Miss Carter," Dr. Chen called, her tone gentle but commanding. "Do you have records, notes of your work?" Emily hesitated. I have some notebooks. At home, mostly scribbles. Things I worked on when I couldn't sleep." "Oh, scribbles," Harrington echoed, nearly choking on the word. "For how long?" Emily's voice was soft but steady. "About 10 years. I studied alone. Old textbooks, free articles, sometimes borrowed books from the library." The murmurs flared again. A female student whispered, awestruck, 10 years. By herself. "Acta-ta." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "I want to see them tonight, if possible." Professor Harrington opened his mouth to protest, but swallowed it back. His eyes flicked between Emily's face and the chalkboard, a mix of resentment, resignation, and respect. Emily looked down at her chalk-stained fingers. I didn't think they'd be worth anything." Don't underestimate yourself," Dr. Chen said, resting a warm hand on Emily's shoulder. "The value isn't in the paper. It's in this." She tapped gently at Emily's temple. Another professor known for his hard skepticism stepped forward, his tone direct. "Ms. Carter, Would you consider joining our research group? Emily blinked, startled. Around the room, every gaze remained fixed on her, but no longer as an outsider, no longer as invisible. In the back, a young student wiped at her eyes, voice trembling. Thank you for standing up there, for showing us we're allowed to dream. A small smile bloomed across Emily's lips, quiet, but radiant. A smile that carried 1,000 silent victories. Beyond the window, the late afternoon sun streamed in, illuminating the chalkboard now filled with what had once been mystery and was now a doorway. Ms. Satter Gandat Hakasto Carter. Doctor. Chan's voice was firm.
I'll be contacting MIT.
They need to hear this. Emily bit her lip, emotion rising in her chest. In that moment, she realized her life had just turned a page. A chapter only she could have written. A chapter that began with a single piece of chalk. Emily couldn't sleep that night. She sat at her small kitchen table, the worn, yellowed notebooks spread out before her like fragile relics. Page after page of her own handwriting equations, diagrams, symbols no one had ever seen, except for her. The soft glow of the kitchen lamp cast warm light over the faded ink, making them feel both humble and mysterious. This is all I've got," Emily whispered, fingertips brushing the pages, her eyes brimming. "Will it be enough?" Her phone buzzed. A message from Dr. Chen. "I've notified the MIT admissions board. They want to see your materials. I'll pick you up at 8 tomorrow." Emily stared at the screen, her heartbeat quickening. MIT, a name that had once felt as distant as the moon, was now calling her name. All night, she sat awake, flipping through each notebook. Even though every mark was her own, she couldn't stop wondering. Will this stand in a room full of giants? The next morning, Dr. Chen waited outside with a warm, encouraging smile. "Ready, Emily?" Emily clutched the stack of notebooks to her chest and nodded. "I don't know if I'm ready, but I know I can't turn back." The conference room at MIT gleamed with natural light, but the air inside was dense with quiet scrutiny. 4 professors sat around a long table, all gazing at Emily, the woman in the simple gray cardigan, holding her notebooks as if they were pieces of her soul. "Ice Erdi Dadores. This is Emily Carter. Doctor," Chen announced solemnly, "the woman who solved Harrington's paradox at yesterday's symposium using an unpublished method." One professor adjusted his glasses. "We've heard, and we want to see." Emily stepped forward, gently placing each notebook onto the table. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the first page. I don't know if these will mean anything to you," she began softly. "I just wrote what made sense to me." Every night, after finishing my cleaning shifts, a professor flipped through a few pages, pausing at a line of transformations. You derived these on your own." Emily nodded. "No formal undergraduate. No master's coursework. I took some community college classes and old library books." Silence. A younger professor flipped rapidly to another page, pointing to a string of unfamiliar notations. This? What is this?" Emily leaned over. That's a cyclical substitution. I thought if you apply it recursively, it simplifies the redundant term in the previous step. The younger professor blinked. I've never seen this before. The silver-haired professor stood, pacing thoughtfully. Miss Carter, what I see here is an unbounded mind. But you must understand, academia doesn't easily embrace those outside its system. Emily tightened her grip. I'm not here for a title. I'm here because I love mathematics. I just want to learn more, understand more. Dr. Tat. Chen smiled proudly. And that's exactly why she belongs here. A heavy pause. Then the silver-haired professor sighed, his expression softening. We'll need time to review everything. Botatata desos cool ba. I will say this. You've made us rethink what's possible. He turned to Dr. Shh. I'd like to propose a provisional research position. 6 months? No guarantees. But a chance. Emily's breath caught. Thank you. Thank you so much, she whispered, her voice trembling. Don't thank me, the professor replied gently. Prove us wrong. Make it impossible for us to deny you. Chen placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. The door is open, Emily, but crossing it is a long journey. Emily looked at the notebooks on the table, at the faces that once doubted, now mixed with a quiet respect. She nodded. I'll walk it, with everything I've got. And in that moment, she realized the hardest equation was never on the chalkboard. It had always been within the human heart. Emily walked those 6 months like walking a tightrope. Every morning, she stepped into MIT's research lab with that same feeling, small and yet immense. The lab, a place where prodigies debated fiercely, where whiteboards overflowed with equations only a few could decipher. It had become familiar. But familiar didn't mean easy. Every step felt like a test. Every glance, a silent evaluation. Miss Carter, a young researcher called from across the room, his tone dripping with mockery. You know, this isn't the janitor's closet anymore. Emily smiled softly. She didn't reply. She had heard worse. But every time, the old scar inside her quietly ached. She opened her notebook and began tracing through a complex variant of Harrington's paradox. Her desk was a mess of scribbled papers. Last night, she'd stayed up till 3 a.m. Alone, with a cup of cold coffee, flipping through old formulas. No one's making you stay here, came another voice, Marcy. A PhD candidate, curly-haired, sharp-eyed. You have no degree, no dissertation. No one's forcing you to prove anything. Emily looked up. I know. Marcy's lip curled. Then why not quit MIT? Isn't for outsiders. Emily pressed her lips together. I used to think that too. But math doesn't have borders. Marcy scoffed and walked away. Emily turned back to the board. The numbers swirled in her mind. But today, they tangled. Stubborn. Elusive. Was it exhaustion? Pressure? Or fear? The door opened. Chen stepped inside, holding a steaming cup of coffee. Emily, she said gently, setting it down. Take a break. Emily lifted her tired eyes. Dark circles etched deep. I'm scared I'm not fast enough. They're waiting for me to fail. Chen sat beside her, her voice low, warm. You don't have to be fast. You need to be right. And persistent. But they don't believe I belong here. Dr. Chen's smile deepened. They once thought women didn't belong in labs, that people of color didn't deserve front-row seats, that a single mother in a gray cardigan couldn't solve a problem no committee could touch. Emily stared at her. A quiet warmth flickered beneath the cold ache in her chest. You belong here, Emily, because you're here. Every day, every night. Nobody gave you a seat, you claimed it. Emily's fist clenched. A small ember lit up. Then, I won't leave. The semester's final symposium. Emily stood off stage, watching others present. Polished slides. Complex jargon. Harrington sat in the front row, his cold gaze fixed on the podium. Next up, announced the moderator, Emily Carter. A hush. Heads turned. Some whispered. Some frowned. Emily stepped forward. No laptop. No slides. Only a worn notebook in her hand. I won't be presenting with a slideshow, she began. I'll write. She approached the board. For the first time, her steps didn't tremble. This problem, she said, has lived inside my head for a long time. And today, I want to share it the way I've lived with it. Silence. She raised the chalk, drew a line. A transformation. A substitution. Slowly, the symbols appeared familiar yet strange. From the front row, Dr. Harrington squinted, leaning forward. Dr. Chen smiled softly, whispering. Watch, Emily continued. The board filled up. A structure emerged. A pattern no one in the room had seen before. What? Is that a professor whispered? Wait, she's simplifying it. Another murmured. A student snapped photos furiously. A researcher whispered, awestruck. She found a shortcut. Dr. Harrington shot to his feet. Stop, he barked. That hasn't been validated. Emily turned calmly. Not validated, she said, doesn't mean it's invalid. And she drew the final line. The board stood complete. A solution. Quiet. Brilliant. Silence. Then a burst of applause. Thunderous. Relentless. Emily turned, her eyes shining, a slow smile blooming across her face. You see, Lily, she whispered. Mom didn't back down. Emily stood there, breath trembling, heart pounding like a relentless drum. The applause thundered through the hall, not polite, not obligatory, but raw, genuine. Rising from hearts forced to admit they had just witnessed something unprecedented. Dr. Chen was the first to step onto the stage. She gazed at the chalkboard, at the intricate, elegant web of transformations Emily had woven. Then she turned to Emily, her eyes shining with profound admiration. Emily, she said softly, you've just opened an entirely new path. A ripple ran through the hall. A professor from Princeton stepped forward, brow furrowed as he studied the board. She combined parallel transformation with multi-level permutation, but no one's ever published this approach. A whisper rose from the rows. If this method holds, it could break the current theoretical ceiling. Phones raised, photos snapped. The same eyes that once dismissed her now wide with awe and a touch of humbled wonder. At the front, Professor Harrington remained seated, motionless. The arrogance was gone from his face. In its place, something quieter, something heavier. The look of a man forced to see what he never wished to acknowledge. Emily clutched her old notebook tight. She could feel the entire auditorium waiting for her words, for the woman in the gray cardigan, the single mother, the outsider, to speak. "I don't really know what to say," Emily began, her voice gentle yet steady. "I've been thinking about this problem for years. Every night, after work, after my daughter fell asleep, I'd sit at my kitchen table, staring at numbers. I didn't have a lab. I didn't have a degree. Just a notebook and a belief. Silence. A reverent, listening silence. I never imagined I'd stand here," she continued. "I just thought, if I kept trying, maybe one day, the answer would come." Chen placed a warm hand on her shoulder. "You found it, Emily. And more than that, you've opened a door for all of us." Another professor pushed forward, eager. "Emily, do you have other notes? These discoveries, they need to be published." A graduate student called out. "Carter, could you show me how to use that substitution? I've been stuck on this problem all semester." Emily looked at them, all these faces, once dismissive, now seeking. A strange feeling welled inside her. Not pride, not vindication, but release. She no longer needed to prove she belonged. Her work, her method had already spoken for her. At last, Professor Harrington rose. He walked slowly to the board, stared at it, then turned to Emily. "Carter," he said, voice low and deliberate, "it seems I was wrong." Emily blinked, startled not by the words, but by the look in his eyes. Gone was the disdain. In its place, reluctant respect. "Thank you," Harrington added quietly, "for reminding me that no one holds a monopoly on truth." Another moment of stillness. Then a second wave of applause, even louder than the first. And this time, the entire auditorium stood. Dr. Chen beamed. "You're no longer a stranger in this hall, Emily." Emily nodded softly. A tear slid down her cheek. She turned back to the board. The symbols, the numbers, they no longer looked like barriers. They were gateways, and she had stepped through. "So," Emily smiled, humble yet powerful, "can I begin now?" "Octa, idea." Chen laughed gently. "Baby." Emily. The world is listening." Emily Carter pushed open the door to a different lecture hall 6 months after that unforgettable symposium. But this time, she didn't wear a worn cardigan, and her gaze no longer held hesitation. At the front, the whiteboard awaited. Students were already seated, their eyes fixed on her, not with doubt, but with expectation. With respect, with admiration. Emily adjusted her glasses, offering a quiet smile. "Satitiosas, satindina sets. Today de taboy. We'll continue with transformations in multidimensional spaces. But first," she turned to the board, lifted a marker, and began to write. No snickers, no dismissive stares. She was no longer the janitor. She was now a visiting lecturer for the university's honors program, an invitation extended by the Department of Applied Mathematics itself. After her groundbreaking paper on the enhanced Leo Takahashi method was published in the International Journal of Mathematics under the headline, Carter. Ha! Carter's Variation. A.E.E.Az Hunto, a new paradigm in quantum structures. In just 6 months, Emily had achieved something she once thought impossible, stepping out of invisibility into a space where her voice mattered. Professor Harrington, who had since stepped down as department chair, now emailed her periodically, sharing updates on research inspired by her work. In one message, he'd written, "I never imagined I'd cite a janitor in an academic paper. But you've shown me. I don't know everything." Emily printed that email and taped it above her desk. She still spent her evenings in the university, but no longer scrubbing floors. Now, she stayed late to write, to research, to explore the endless corridors of mathematics she once could only admire from afar. Her daughter, Lily, had started her freshman year at college. Seeing her mother teach, seeing her respected for her brilliance and perseverance, inspired Lily to pursue astrophysics, becoming the first in their family to step onto the path of scientific research. One late afternoon, as Emily packed up her lecture notes, a young student approached. Curly hair, a fraying backpack, eyes shy, yet filled with hope. "Professor Carter," the girl began softly, I just wanted to say thank you. You made me believe someone like me could belong here." Emily looked at the girl and in her saw a reflection of herself from years ago. She smiled gently. "I used to think that too," Emily replied. "But you know what? People like you are the future." As the student walked away, Emily gazed around the classroom. Faces of every background, dreams in progress. And she realized her journey wasn't just about mathematics. It was about presence, about standing up not to defeat anyone, but simply to declare, "I am here, and I deserve to be." That evening, back home, she opened the drawer that held her old notebooks, the ones scribbled with formulas, sketches, and wild ideas born from cheap pens and relentless hope. She flipped to the very first page, scrawled in messy handwriting, "Never be afraid to ask." Emily smiled. And just below, she added a new line, "Because the right question might change the world." You see, sometimes genius doesn't wear titles, diplomas, or accolades. It walks quietly among us, carrying an extraordinary light. If Emily Carter's story touched you, share it. Have you ever been underestimated, yet persevered? Don't hesitate to comment your story below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss more extraordinary stories hidden in ordinary lives. Because maybe the next inspiration is you.